I'll present the next speaker, Tarek Kocar from the Rockefeller Foundation, and he's going to be talking about this from the 2030 vision.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you to the organizers of COGX and to our friends at ARM and the 2030 Vision community for making the Sustainable Development Goals such a central part of this gathering. I'd like to spend just 10 minutes talking to you about what I think about the world of data science and how the tools and talents of data scientists can be used to improve the lives of the disadvantaged. But I really am looking forward to our panel discussion right after, where people who are much smarter than me can discuss this in more detail. So I want to start with a bit of a story. 70 years ago, the Rockefeller Foundation in New York received a proposal. We're a philanthropic foundation, people send us a proposal. And this group of scientists was asking some questions that may seem familiar to you. So they were asking questions like, can you simulate the neural connections between a human brain? Can a machine be taught to learn? Can natural language be represented computationally? Of course, the proposal came from John McCarthy, and together with folks like Claude Shannon, they went on to have the Dartmouth Summer Conference, where the term artificial intelligence was founded. So these are the kind of, if you like, the early rock stars of artificial intelligence. So that's happening 70 years ago. Another thing was happening 70 years ago as well. So this picture was taken in a park that I can sort of see from my house now in Midtown Manhattan. And these kids are looking at a document that's been mentioned several times over the last few days, particularly on the ethics stage, the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, when we talk about AI ethics and human rights, we're normally talking about Article 2 around being free from discrimination, etc. But I'd actually draw your attention to Article 27, which says that everyone has the right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So 70 years ago, we're giving birth to this field of artificial intelligence, and we're also saying that everyone has a right to share in the advances of this field. So my question today is, how are we doing? Is this field that we kicked off actually benefiting everyone, or is it just benefiting the few? And a way to answer that question is to have a look at what are the big problems out there that need cracking, and to see what we're doing as a community to try and solve them. So let me give you a quick tour of some big problems as I see them. So prior to joining the Rockefeller Foundation, I worked at the World Bank for about 7 years, where I ran the World Bank's Open Data Initiative. So I've been working with international economic data for a long time. And I produced this pair of tree maps a couple of years ago. And if you've not seen one of these before, don't worry. It's basically showing the area represents a number of people. And it's showing the total number of people living in poverty in the world between 1990 and 2013. So take a second to look at that, and three things should jump out at you, or they at least jump out to me. So first, the big orange square in the top left, that's China in 1990. And the smaller dark orange square on the right is China in 2013. So you see a massive reduction in the number of poor people in China that's driven progress, taking around 2 billion people living in poverty in 1990 to around 700 million people in 2013, 2014. So that's one big thing you notice. But then have a look at the yellow area. So the yellow area is Africa. So on the left, the yellow countries represent, the yellow countries are countries in Africa. But look at the total area of yellow on the right. What's happened? The number of poor people in Africa has actually increased, right? So the poverty rate, the percentage of people living in poverty has gone down in Africa, but the number has gone up because progress just hasn't kept up with population growth. That's the second thing to notice. Final thing to notice, look at the date, 2013, right? Even today, the latest data we have on poverty estimates is from 2015, maybe 2016. If we're trying to fight for a world where we're ending poverty, we're flying blind. We don't have current data, and we only have data at this kind of resolution, very coarse macro-level data. Have a quick look at power. So 90% of the world does have some access to electricity, but there's still a billion people who you could say don't have access. And these billion people are the hardest to reach. These are folks who are living in predominantly rural areas in Africa and India, and your usual market-oriented solutions of extending the grid just don't work. So you need new types of information to unlock financing and different types of infrastructure to reach these folks, and we just don't have the tools and intelligence to do that. Similar thing on energy. And then last example, something like under 5 mortality, children dying. So it's still the case that over 5 million children die a year. There's been huge progress since 1990, but to put that into more real terms, that's 3,000 children dying every day in India, the majority of those within the first year of life. And many of those are in rural areas where the only healthcare they have is delivered by community health workers. And the question is, where are the AI and data science tools helping these folks make the most of their limited resources? Where are the tools that are helping us identify where these folks are who need assistance, etc. So these are some of the big problems. And I'd say we're not there yet. We don't have sufficient talent working in the social sector to address these problems. We certainly don't have the quality of tools and data available for the commercial sector to address these problems. And in general, there's just so many pieces of the enabling environment that are kind of missing. So what do I think we should do to address this? I think we should build a field of using data science for social impact. And what does that mean? What does that look like? So I'm going to make the analogy between this and building the field of public health. Initially in the United States. So the Rockefeller Foundation in the earlier part of the 20th century was involved in kicking off the field of public health. No one just sort of woke up and said, I'm going to help catalyze the field of public health. What they did was 3 big things. One, they focused on concrete projects to start learning and activity. So they started by tackling hookworm in the American South, which gave people the opportunity to develop the core of epidemiology, key pieces of public health activity like the use of media and film to educate folks and show people that there is a way to do things differently. The second was developing a professional identity. So no one thought of themselves as a public health professional back in the day, but through that kind of work, we developed an identity for that group of folks. And lastly, creating networks of people. It's not just one organization or one institution that's going to do this. You need to have a network of actors who are supporting one another. So that's kind of what I think we need to do with the data science world. And let me just sketch what we're doing, and then we can hop into our panel. So one, this idea of focus on a specific problem where data science can help to improve lives. So the example I'll give here is an organization called Atlas AI, which the Rockefeller Foundation helped to seed and spin out of Stanford University. Now what you're looking at is actually a poverty map of East Africa. So if you remember the slide earlier of poverty statistics that I showed you, those data were old and coarse, right? They were from 2013 and they were at the national level. So this is data that you can get for basically the current year on poverty at a very high resolution. So not only are you seeing poverty at like a national or a district level, you're seeing it at a gridded level. This lets you see where pockets of prosperity are. You can see where people are doing well and not, and just unlocks a ton of opportunities. Similarly, you can do the same thing with things like crop yields. Again, the quality of agricultural surveys in Africa is really poor. Normally, the data are several years old. They're really out of date. If your economy is sort of 70% reliant on agriculture and you don't know what crop yields are going to be that year, it's kind of a problem, right? Again, the folks at Atlas AI, they combine satellite imagery with ground truth data and some really impressive machine learning to build these high resolution, and I mean high resolution, like 10-meter resolution models of crop yield. So you can see, where is productivity high, where is it low, and what can you do about it. This idea of developing a professional identity and growing capacity in the field is really important as well. You'll hear on the panel from DataKind, who are an organization that we support. Their model, if you don't know it, is basically data scientists without borders. And what they do is they match data science talent, often working in industry, with social sector problems to solve them. So this is an example of some work they did in the Molten Niguel district in California. So this is the water district that's affected by drought. So they have to ship in water to meet demand for that water. But if you can't accurately predict demand, you're spending a heck of a lot of money basically shipping in huge tankers of water. So they had a project where one of the volunteers was, I think, an engineer from Netflix. So he spent his days, predicting which movie you'll watch next, and he could apply his skills to basically predict how much water the district is going to consume. As a result, they could save on costs bringing water in, and I think they end up saving order of like $5 million a year just through this kind of optimization. So it's a very vivid example of how data science can really advance a social sector cause. So that's a big part of it. And then this idea of public interest technology, which folks like the Ford Foundation are championing in the US, and there are similar initiatives in the UK. How do you build a pipeline of the next generation of computer science and AI talent who have familiarity and awareness of the social sector, a computer science curriculum that has ethics, social sciences, the humanities deeply baked into it? This is all part of that. So building the future generation of folks who do this. And then lastly, this idea of investing in both networks and public goods. I'll give one nerdy example of a public good. So machine learning data, this is the sort of ingredient that goes into your algorithm, has massive bias problems. And you've heard of all the stuff with autonomous vehicles, not being able to differentiate between people with dark skin as well. But it's even more basic than that. ImageNet is this very well-known training data library to train algorithms to detect objects and things. 60% of images in that database come from just 6 countries. And the implications are, and this is a paper that came out 2 days ago, object detection, even something as innocuous as that, doesn't work as well in developing countries as it does here. So even if you wanted to have your computer to recognize a can of Coke or a spice or something, it's something like 15 to 30% less effective in a country like Sierra Leone or Senegal than it is in a richer country. And it's literally by income. The richer the country, the better your object detection algorithm works. So huge opportunities there to improve things. And then finally on networks, one example of a network. So there's a conference almost as big as this one, taking place in Nairobi in August. It's Africa's largest gathering of machine learning engineers and scientists. I'm guessing some of you knew about this, but if not, I'd like check it out. There are networks of folks who have very similar interests to us, and frankly, they're growing exponentially. And this is where we're going to have to invest our efforts to build connections and nurture those communities. So finally, for us, this work is motivated by the catchily titled Data Science for Social Impact Collaborative that we launched together with MasterCard earlier this year. And these are kind of our goals. We want to build a field of using data science for social impact. We're working together with other funders and technology companies to do this. We're super pleased to be here. These, I think, are the sort of key building blocks of this field building exercise. And I very much look forward to talking more in the panel discussion. Thanks very much.
Please take a seat. So to actually get all of the perspectives of the speakers and understand how are they planning on contributing to this objective, I'll invite them all to stage, starting with Eric Daimler, CEO of Spinglass Ventures, who will be our moderator.
Eric.
Good afternoon. Got a microphone here. Someday. I was preparing my British history in advance of coming here. So for the various talks I've been fortunate enough to give, the one that applies here has a less fortunate history. Anybody ever heard of Malthusian principles, or Malthus, the economist? He's a British economist in 1798. He famously, consistent with my prejudice actually about British people, he was multi-talented actually. So he was both an economist and a cleric, and he had a prediction about food productivity, saying that if food productivity didn't continue to increase, that the population would eventually die off. That would be a natural consequence of history. Obviously, we're all still here because food productivity increased. Based on technology. Improvements in technology improves the productivity. And I use that as a frame for this conversation because this is not an optional conversation. This is not just actually nice, not just merely interesting. It's actually a requirement. We have to have more AI in the world in order to literally survive as a species. And I'll use that as a context for the conversation today. So we have a brilliant panel that backgrounds of which are all clearly available. So I just want to dig into it and dig into what we're talking about. So Veronica, maybe we can start with you and just talk a little bit about the work you're doing and the benefit it's applying to some underprivileged communities.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Actually, all the brilliant people had to be someplace else today, so I came in their place. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Atlas AI, the company that produced the data sets that you saw the visualizations from Tarek a moment ago. Our company was founded about a year ago as a for-profit public benefit corporation in the US. And in our mind, this really represents our commitment to have an impact, to be a mission-driven organization. So as well as doing great science, of which you saw the outcomes, we're also trying to create a data point that says companies can be created and be sustainable in this space where our primary focus is improving the lives of the disadvantaged, and be sustainable and profitable, and that don't always rely on the next check from the kind of souls at the Rockefeller Foundation. So, we're interested in not only creating the technology, but also in building a business model that's sustainable. And to Tarek's last point, we're also very much interested in enabling the ecosystem through which the kinds of data products that we create can actually be absorbed and used. I was making the analogy earlier that, if I presented my 89-year-old mother with a supercomputer, that supercomputer is very, very capable. My mother would not be capable of using it. And I think we have that kind of distance between the kinds of precision and accuracy that we can generate in our data sets and the ability in general of the sector to absorb them. So,
perfect. Thank you, Victoria. Now, Ashley, I know that Tariq gave a great frame of some of the problems we have. Now, you work for a large firm that's not usually equated with a great amount of social good, but you are.
Thank you.
But you are executing, as a focus area, right?
Yeah.
But you actually specifically have a focus area for social good inside of this big firm. Maybe you can speak a little bit about what you see the biggest challenges are inside that particular effort.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'm helping to lead our AI for social good efforts globally for McKinsey, and our goal and the challenge we've given ourselves is always around impact, and impact in this case is how do we save a life, how do we improve quality of life or quality of the human condition, and that means doing for us. So we've gone out and we're helping in different areas with helping survivors of human trafficking get back to leading a normal life, helping in the Mozambique crisis, how do we get children after these cyclones back to their education, how do we help the unemployed by helping understand who is most likely to be at risk of long-term unemployment, so a few different areas. And I think, throughout that, we've taken an angle of how can we as a private organization enable all the wonderful work that the startups and the NGOs and the foundations that are already doing. And for me, I think it's all the things that Tarek already talked about around how do we give the tools, how do we enable the talent. But maybe I'll just highlight a few things that I see as the biggest points. One is I'm amazed by the talent that we have working on these problems. So when we looked at how many use cases exist of AI for social good, we found over 160 use cases aligned towards the Sustainable Development Goals. How fantastic. Imagine what we would accomplish if we could only take those 160 use cases that already exist, those great ideas, and scale them and get them to have impact in many more places. So I think one challenge we have to address is scaling the things that currently exist in the work. And the second thing where I've already also stumbled myself is if you put out an algorithm that that's only a part of the solution. Somebody at the very end, a person has to connect with that. A caseworker who's helping a survivor of human trafficking, a caseworker who is helping a person who has lost their job. And they have to trust the algorithm, and they have to think it betters them, and they have to connect with it emotionally. So I think we're focusing a lot on how do we not just think about all the great technology and the design, but how do we think about the human-centric, the design thinking that has to lead the AI?
It's really perfect. And again, Tariq, but you framed this conversation perfectly well. So I want to dig into more of this talent issue. But first, with Duncan, I want to build off of what Ashley said. So there's two ways of then looking at the talent being brought to bear in the AI sphere. One would be data science talent, kind of technical talent, and then the other that Ashley brought up, you might say this is kind of talent, but it's also kind of awareness of AI, education of AI among the general populace. So where do you see, in this kind of talent circle, do you see the biggest challenges arising? No, fair to say both.
Well, the odd thing is, although in the social sector itself there isn't a wealth of AI talent yet, there is a wealth of AI talent that the social sector can use. And that's the founding approach for DataKind, is that we have reached out to those of you. Well, let's start by asking the audience a question. How many of you work for a charity? Okay. How many of you work in the commercial sector? So vastly more in the commercial sector. I'm not going to mention the government sector here, but let's put that in kind of social-ish at the moment. But for a lot of people who've been working in the commercial sector, you're doing things that may make your bosses money, but they're not necessarily very fulfilling in themselves. And so what we do is we give those people an opportunity to put their talent to use in the social sector, in the not-for-profit sector. And so I think the talent can be there. But then the challenge comes, and I think this is an interesting point that you just raised, how do you do that in a way that isn't clever people from outside coming and imposing their solutions? Because we know from just about every walk of life that when that happens, those solutions fail. Either they're misdirected, they don't understand the problem, or, as you suggested, they're just not adopted because no one trusts them. And so part of our process has always been to bring the charities, bring the third sector along to the events we run, into the problems. They're the people who direct us, who give us the insight, because they own the problem. They understand what this or what impact this could have at the end of the day. So I think that's the way we try and match that up, is making sure that the people who understand the problem are actually part of the solution. It's not us imposing the solution on people.
Tariq, I want to come back then to you. So this is the talent question to you. When we're addressing the awareness of AI among the general populace, are we working just at the grassroots to create awareness, create trust, or are we perhaps a level up to work at what the training systems are and the people that would deliver some sort of infrastructure for that awareness?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as a thought experiment, you can ask the question, let's say you're a civil society organization in a country like Tanzania, and you have an organization like, let's say, DataKind, who wants to help you implement an AI system to optimize the routes of healthcare workers or something like that. Is it more useful for that organization to have help in implementing that system, or is it more valuable for that organization to just be more aware of the AI that's already being rolled out in society around them? So, I mean, there are countries around the world who are starting to adopt predictive policing technologies. There are all kinds of really complicated regulations in motion that will deeply complicate the life and work of these civil society organizations. So that's actually one question, like where is their greatest value in optimizing an individual organization's task, or just helping them deal with the environment in general? So that's one bit of it. And the other part I'd say is, I still don't have a good answer to this question, whether we need to be taking a case-by-case approach to supporting organizations like this, or whether you want to start thinking of this as a market that you can serve with new kinds of products and tools. So this is something that DataKind is moving to now. This is the work we're doing with them. Instead of serving 5 individual, let's say, community health organizations working with them to solve an individual problem, what if you were to treat them as a market and design standard tools, standard products in the same way you would do as a commercial organization to serve that need. So that's a little bit of a shift I think we need to see. The reason I think Atlas AI is interesting because they are taking a firmly market-oriented kind of commercial approach to the problem rather than a case-by-case capacity-building approach.
That's really a terrific path then for the conversation. So knowing that most of the people in here are in the commercial sector, again, not counting the government sector, I suppose. Victoria, I want to come back to you. So you do some work in Africa. What's your perspective on the degree to which the social sector should even be empowering the commercial sector, or the commercial sector would both benefit by working with the social sector? How do we make those sort of trade-offs if the point of this is lives of the disadvantaged?
I take pride in our company and our team. We have some of the best people on the planet in remote sensing and machine learning. But I will also tell you that they know next to nothing about how to improve lives of people that live on less than $1.90 a day in sub-Saharan Africa. So for us to even begin to be relevant, we absolutely need to have partnerships with social organizations in those places. And I don't like to play favorites. I will work with anybody that can help us bridge the gap to those that need the technology that we have, those that can use it, and in some cases it could be a World Bank. And in fact, this is one of the partners that we're working on right now to create a exquisitely detailed poverty map for Ethiopia. So that's one example. Sometimes we will work with commercial entities, including, for example, McKinsey in Kenya, because McKinsey in Kenya knows how to work with the Kenyan government. My super smart ML engineers, they will never learn how to work with the government in Kenya, therefore their work will always remain captive, in our servers. Even, beyond that, we want to be able to work with people on the ground, with the farmers. So, I had the privilege of visiting Kenya as the first thing that I did as the CEO of the company. We went out to visit a smallholder farm. He's the person that needs access to the agriculture data sets that Tariq was showing earlier. The question to us is, how do we get it to him or her? And again, Atlas AI will do incredible work in building out these data sets, but we're not going to be the people that will write the applications. That, for example, one day that farmer may be able to download, even on their feature phone, to be able to know how to maximize the productivity of their field. So who's going to do that? Well, it's going to be, the incredible knowledge ecosystem that actually exists in places like Kenya. So in order for us to be able to work with them, we need to get them ready to look at this data set. It's a little bit like, the olden days when the iPhone shipped and, everybody was really interested and excited about it, but there was no third-party app developer ecosystem. And Apple, started the long, kind of laborious process of creating that by getting people to understand what the capabilities of their platform was. In many ways, I see us, having to do exactly the same thing.
Victoria, it almost seems like, I'll say it in a very non-eloquent way, it almost seems like we're awkward dating in a little bit, where the startups and the governments and the foundations and the industries who, the commercial industries who have the talent, who want to invest, and everybody's a little bit trying to figure out how do we work together, right? I mean, I know even from some of our experiences, we want to support and scale startups, but how do you scale a startup where you say, let me give you all this help, and the startup even says, I don't even have the resources to take your help. I can't even, right? So it's just, I'd love your reflections on this as well, Duncan, because it's
Yeah, it has been interesting working with, because we've worked with a wide range of social sector organisations, and one of the learnings is that size isn't the key factor. Yeah. One of our best success stories is a small charity that works with young people not in education, employment and training in the northeast of England. They were one of the first organisations we worked with in the UK. They had 7 employees at the time. Their 8th employee was a data scientist. And that took real commitment on behalf of their CEO to actually say, this is what we need to do to transform the way we work. And you can see that. And it's often driven by leadership, actually. It's often driven by persuading leaders that data science, AI, just data sometimes, can have an impact on the way they do business. And that's difficult because the people leading social sector organizations are often very much not from a technological background at all.
Yeah.
They've often come, so for example, in social work charities, they've been social workers. In healthcare charities, they've been the healthcare professions. They haven't necessarily had that background. So we've got to find ways of giving them the confidence to do stuff, as well as Tariq, you said, as giving them the solutions that they can easily lift and move into their area, that they don't need to necessarily start everything from TensorFlow and work upwards.
Absolutely.
Ashley, so you're just going back on that point. So you're really well placed to be inside of an organization that's really well known for having some of the smartest people. But working inside of a nonprofit group there, you're really well placed to think about what are the considerations you have inside about empowering other nonprofits versus empowering for-profits that do social good.
Yeah, it's a challenge. One thing we look at is we are constantly challenging ourselves on sustainability and sustainability of the solution. So, for instance, one project that we just did, we would have loved to start earlier, because of course we always want to have impact faster, but at the same time, if we delivered a solution and they didn't have anybody to take it on in that organization and adapt it, algorithms are living, right? And so we had to say, stop, and you hire a data scientist first, we will work with them, we'll develop the capabilities, and then we'll feel more confident about the end result. I think that's been the biggest challenge that we've had to, or bar to where we've had to hold ourselves to. And I think the other part is on, the ethics of AI. So in situations where, we're working in low quality, everybody always asks, like, what do you think about the data quality and what you're trying to develop? And I say, yeah, the data quality is incredibly poor. It's just going to be a fact of life. But the question is, are we responsible with how we interpret that data if the data quality is poor? And I brought up, this example earlier of a survivor of human trafficking, where if you looked at what services are going to help them and what maybe services you're delivering and doesn't help, we had to challenge ourselves at that point to say, okay, we feel confident that this service, through our causal models, we can say is very, will help people. But can we take these services away if the data quality wasn't poor? What if we're wrong? And I think that for us has been kind of one of the biggest challenges throughout this whole thing of, we have to hold ourselves to that kind of moral and ethical standard as we go into this in poor data quality environments.
I think that's a crucial point, and one of the huge differences between commercial data science and social good data science is that in social good data science, our objective functions, the things we're trying to do are so much more complex than they are in the commercial world. In the commercial world, fundamentally, we're about making money or delivering shareholder value, if you want to put it that way. That's a relatively easy function to measure and therefore to build your models against. But when you're looking at, as you said there, human trafficking, actually trying to determine what is it that is the positive outcome is not trivial. It's really, really, really complex. And it's so easy to get wrong. And the implications of getting it wrong can be huge. So it's something we need to bear in mind and be quite humble about, I think, in our approaches.
Maybe one last part is that I think the thing that's very positive for commercial organizations to think about when you're investing in AI for social good is you can experiment and challenge yourself because it's a data poor environment. It sparks creativity. So I think what we can also do is look at it from the perspective of this is, for an organization to invest in this helps your R&D, it helps, empower your people and inspire your talents. So actually there's a huge ROI to do this from a commercially relevant perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Duncan, the interesting part, when I spent time in the United States federal government, the issue that we talked about relative to the commercial sector is that, yes, the objective function is more clear in the commercial sector, but the part that makes the commercial sector easier is that you can serve a part of society.
Correct.
For the U.S. state government, there's no part of the society that we can just say, you're a little too difficult to address, and we will ignore you. And so I want to actually then, Tariq, you're actually a good person to address this. You work for a firm that's blessed with this ability to look very long term. You are not looking quarter to quarter to be sure. You're looking at very long problems. So on this issue, are there ways that you might say that there are groups that we can address more quickly? There are issues that get around and address groups that are more in the near term while still having that kind of holistic, whole society, long-term vision?
That's another very good question. You're giving me the easy ones. I think the only way to answer that question is really to establish what I was mentioning this gentleman Tom Khalil, who I think coined the phrase bilinguals. So people who have one foot in the world of social sector problems and one foot in the world of data science. Because only then can you figure out, well, what are the questions I can ask and what are the answers that can I get? And actually, that's where I see some of the most promising collaborations between the philanthropic sector, the social sector, and the private sector. So, to give you a couple of examples, our friends at MasterCard, we work together with on this Data Science for Social Impact Collaborative. Everyone thinks of MasterCard as your friendly neighborhood payment provider, but they're a huge data company, right? So they have a lot of intelligence on marketing information, where people are spending money, etc. But what they also can tell you is when the power is on or not somewhere. How do they do that? So I forget which particular natural disaster there was in the United States, but the engineers at MasterCard realized that the point of sale terminals that they have in gas stations, if they can sort of see them, they realize that there's power on there, and they can take that data, make it available in a map or an API, and very quickly, faster than pretty much anyone else, show you where the power's on, where people can get access to fuel, communication, etc. But no one would think of asking MasterCard, hey MasterCard, can you tell me where the power's on after a natural disaster? So that's an example of, you kind of need bilinguals. You need someone who knows what's capable in this world to ask the right question. One more example, the one around power. I shared. So the sort of billion people who don't have access to electricity, what does giving access to electricity to someone in a rural part of Kenya or India look like? Well, you can't really extend the grid out there because that's super expensive. Little home solar things are fine for lights, but you're never going to get up the chain of sort of productive use of power. So you need to have a mix of energy. So things like mini grids and sort of smaller installations, but these require investment and capital, right? So what's the one piece of information you need to know before you start investing in infrastructure? It is, what is the latent demand for power? Can you predict how much power someone who's never had power before is going to consume? Because only when you know that information can you start investing in it. So that's a question that folks in the power sector had, and it turns out that you can combine expertise in machine learning. You can take historical utility data from companies in East Africa and build a model to do that. And that's another project that we funded, which we'll be launching later this month, which is doing exactly that, forecasting demand for power, so you can unlock investment in these sorts of grids. So just a couple of ways that works.
Tariq, I don't know if I love the bilingual word, because I've spent 20 plus years in AI, and I'd like to call it something else, because it reminds me of this bad joke, which is, what do you call somebody that knows more than one language? Multilingual. What do you call someone that knows only one language? American. And let's find a different term. Victoria, so I have a question. Speaking of what Tariq was describing, when we're leveraging learnings from other domains of AI, no matter what they are, how much are we able to take those learnings just immediately from the developed world and put them into the developing world versus having to invent solutions wholesale and applying them into the developing world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I can kind of segue a little bit and support what Tariq was saying earlier, I think you said the magic word, the I word, investment, right? So I think one of the kind of most significant gaps that we have, certainly when you look at Africa, is the lack of data. I mean, it's almost like there's no data liquidity in the system. And in cases like electricity infrastructure, it's kind of obvious to see how you would use that data. But there are other places where actually the systemic nature of disadvantaging people comes from. Because, for example, the work that Ashley is doing at McKinsey, that addresses really the the outcome, or you address the person that at the end of the day is affected, because a whole bunch of failures happen before, before you get to them. So for example, in Africa, there is hardly any crop insurance market. What is the result of that? The result of that is that people can't get crop insurance. If their crop fails, they will go hungry. Why is that? Because there isn't enough data so that insurance companies can quantify risk and start building products for that market. So when we look at kind of the outcomes, the economic outcomes for many, many people that are disadvantaged, I think although there's a temptation kind of to look at the symptom and try and work towards solving that, and by the way, we should absolutely do that, it also behooves us to look at the systemic factors that lead to that. So social enterprises, I don't think should be thinking of themselves as just something that addresses the last mile, but how do we really transform these markets so that people can begin to help themselves? And I have no idea if I answered your question, but
Yes, perfect, Victoria. No, Duncan, when we're thinking of AI, we can think of it narrowly as just a learning system, a learning algorithm, right? That's the way I would have been trained as an engineer, right? Now, out of that, we might do such things as exploratory data analysis. So I was funded to look into terrorist networks, and what I found instead was human trafficking, actually, out of these networks. So that can be valuable. But we're all here to learn about not just the state of affairs of how we can help, AI can help the disadvantaged, but also kind of where we can grab on. Where we can grab onto this whole system. So if we think of the whole system of AI, the data collection, as Victoria just brought up, the learning algorithms that we just talked about, and maybe the output that Ashley touched on, the responsible decision making, where do you see the biggest risks in that whole system? The biggest issues that we all need to be concerned about when we think about AI helping the disadvantaged?
I think probably the biggest risk is probably around the assumption that we have the knowledge. There is this discrepancy between the people who may be producing the AI solutions and the people who need to use them. And I think it's very, very easy for us to end up in a position where we think we have the solutions. And that's the kind of thing that enables us to fall into all kinds of traps of bias, the bias in the data, as you just said, the fact that there's the whole areas where data just doesn't exist, and that's a bias in itself. I mean, there are some natural challenges that we have. We tend to focus on the fun bits because we're human. If you say to someone, what would you rather be doing? And this is one of the challenges I have when I'm trying to recruit people in my day job. Is everyone wants to do the fun learning bit. Not many people want to do the data cleaning bit that comes before it, or indeed the data processing bit that comes after it, and the productionizing of it. And so, it's trying to make sure that we don't just focus on the fun bits, the exciting bits. I've discovered something really interesting here. But we actually put the attention into systemizing it and enabling it to become a process and a repeatable thing that can be actually used on an ongoing basis.
Perfect. So, Ashley, if we think of AI as a whole system, we know IBM says that half of all AI projects fail. Half, right?
Which half?
Yeah. The quip about advertising. We know that half fails. Which half of my advertising budget is a waste? So we know that half of all AI budgets fail, according to IBM. We know, according to other sources, that 80% of the resources of an AI project are put into, or need to be put into, to Duncan's point, need to be put into the data part, need to be put into the input part, the cleaning, the nomenclature, the ontology awareness for the particular vertical. What part of that is the biggest risk when you're engaging in disadvantaged communities? Is it in the education, or is it actually with your clients, or is it actually in the technology, the implementation of that part of the process?
All of it. I think each part carries different risks, right? So I mean, in the front phase, as an organization that's trying to go out there and do good, I'm shocked at how much effort it takes to find and source ideas where even you can help. So we've looked through the average success rate from first dialogue with an organization, what's your problem, what's your data, to actually starting something with them, 6%. Wow. 6% make it through from those discussions. It's a lot of effort and time. And Duncan, I know you know this even more so from your efforts.
Yeah, I mean, one of our early learnings was you can't simply expect a social sector organisation to turn up on your doorstep with data and a problem that's ready to go. We have had approaches. One of my favourite ones is, I'm not going to name them, a social sector organisation said, we've heard what you do, it's really exciting. Can you help us? But we don't have any data and we don't have a problem. So it was a bit challenging, that one. But our learning was actually that the earlier we can get our experts to, and these are volunteers, remember, to spend time working with the charity, working with the social sector organisation, to help them understand what data they do have, help them frame their questions or their challenges in an analytical way. That then enables you to take it through. So it's lots of early intervention, it's lots of hard work, it's lots of unglamorous work. We call our people data ambassadors when they do that, because it allows us to give them Ferrero Rocher in it as a joke at the end of the project, largely. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of effort from early stage to move up from that 6% to say, 12% success.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine that's the risk at the beginning. Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to add something in terms of the challenges, and I think that's something that we don't often think about. And that's this privacy thing. And in Europe, people know all about GDPR. How many of us think, for example, that GDPR ought to be applying to the farmers in rural Kenya? And what does that mean for them? And, for us, for example, when we produce that data set that is down to 10 square meters and tells you the productivity of your field, in a place where land tenure is pretty sketchy, the question to us is, do we even make that data set available, and who do we share it with? Because for example, somebody might come along and say, you don't practice best practices on your land, we will take it away from you. And then the disadvantaged person really doesn't win. You can imagine a government that might find a tract of land particularly attractive because it always yields, even in times of drought, for example, which has been the case in Kenya certainly this year and 2 years before. They might say, this piece of land over here, we would like to take that for ourselves. So it's not simple. It's far from simple. So, the fact that in my company, we generate these data sets that are so powerful, I don't know how we make them available in such a way that we don't hurt people. And for us, right now, the conversation is perhaps we find civic society partners that will counterbalance to some extent the part of the data sets. But honestly, the hardest problem for us is not making those data sets. And again, it's very, very difficult, don't get me wrong. But once we have them, how do we use them to truly improve lives of the disadvantaged? It's not a foregone conclusion.
So we talked about some of the opportunities and the risks and some of the problems. I now want to, in the time we have remaining, I just want to talk about kind of some hopeful vision for the future and how we can get engaged. And Tariq, you did a great job of framing this whole discussion for us. I want to have you answer in this way, that me as a technologist, I went to work for what my wife reminds me is my lowest paid job ever at the U.S. federal government. Right? And I did that because for a variety of reasons, not least of which was working with some really fantastic mission-driven people. But also there was a scale of problems that I could get engaged with, and a benefit that I could see that just wasn't available for me in a for-profit organization. At least with ones I were exposed. So tell me, I'm a technologist, or I'm here to learn about how we can grab onto this problem. How can I, either as an individual, me as a for-profit entity, or me as a potential source of funds, how can I be engaged with your organization and your partners to make the biggest difference?
It's not an especially flashy answer, but I'd say spend a lot of time deeply understanding the problem, and then use the talents and capabilities that you have to solve it. I think one of the biggest risks that we face in using AI for social change is the risk of not using AI for social change. I don't want to be sitting in a conference like this in 50 years looking back saying, why weren't we using our skills and talents to save the lives of 3,000 children dying a day in India? So, and the only way we're going to do that is to establish trust and understanding between these two worlds. I feel like the social sector has already been burned a couple of times by engagement with industry. I mean, if you were involved in like the first wave of technology for development, I mean, Duncan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say there's generally a lot of skepticism in the social sector for big technology companies, big consulting companies, unfortunately, as well, because they've just seen a very blunt application of technology. So I see the application of AI, and particularly because AI, for all its ills, does have a bit of a multidisciplinary flavor to it. I think we have a higher than none chance of finally understanding a problem in a more fundamental way, and co-creating solutions that matter.
Duncan, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. So if we want to be engaged in social good, and we're thinking of AI as a whole system, maybe I want to be an algorithm developer, but there are a multitude of other places where I can engage in AI that we've talked about. Might be the ethics of AI, the social good of AI as a specialty. Might be in the data cleaning. That's the boring part, I suppose. Tell me the part that I can grab onto, and also maybe tell me where I go if I'm early career, where I go if I'm mid career, where I go if I'm late career.
Well, you can do all of those things pretty much through DataKind if you want to. There are other organisations available.
The perfect setup, that was.
Thank you so much. I'll give you the money later. Yeah, I mean, so there are organisations like DataKind. We're not the only one out there. But really, we want to make those opportunities available to everyone. Also to the third sector, to the not-for-profits as well. That's the other side of that. They need to have somewhere they can come to get insight, to get advice. To your earlier points, we have a network here in the UK of people who are data scientists working for charities, because often they are the only data scientist in their charity. It can be a very lonely place to be if you're the only person who knows who Bayes was. And by the way, if anyone wants to know, his graveyard is just down by Earl Street Station, so you can always go and visit him if you want to. So
nice. I had Malthus, you had Bayes.
Yeah. Probably. So that's terrible jokes going on.
Funny.
You can. So please, if you want to get. Sometimes you just feel these things getting away from you. If anyone wants to get involved with DataKind, very simple. Go to datakind.org. Look at the website. Volunteer your time. The one thing I can guarantee is that it'll be fulfilling. You'll find projects that are of interest and will make a real difference in the world, whatever part of the stage you're at.
Maybe I'll add to it is my ask, because I see a lot of bright young talent in the audience as well. My ask is for you guys to be unrelentless of wherever you work in, to asking your employers that this is important to you. I mean, I've seen we're part of this group called the Corporate Data Partnership as well, which is a bunch of, us, Microsoft, JP Morgan, MasterCard, also part of it. And, they're all doing their AI for good initiatives, and it's because of you. It's because the talent demands it, and the talent says, this is really important to us, and we believe this should be important to the types of organizations we work with. So I think we talked about a lot of risks up here, but there's a lot of really great things happening as well, but it is a bit tough, right? And so we all have to be really relentless in how we try to pursue this and what we ask of ourselves and the companies we work for, regardless of what company that is.
Victoria, I'll let you have the last word. So what is the most hopeful vision we can have by spending time applying AI to the disadvantaged communities?
Well, I really do think that we can change the lives of people in practical ways very, very quickly. I said earlier I had the opportunity of visiting Kenya, and I honestly went as somebody who spent all my career in high tech, most of it in the Silicon Valley. I had no idea what the country was like. I left actually with a profound sense of optimism. I met people, in the coffee shops and in the parlors in Kenya that are incredibly talented. And I think these are all people that care deeply about their communities, their societies. These are the people that will bring the solutions to the problems. And I think we're beginning to see how to connect the dots. So I think, sitting here 5 years from now, I think, for example, there will be a crop insurance market in Kenya. I can guarantee you that because the data sets will be out there.
There was an inscription on the carpet of the Obama's Oval Office that said, "The long arc of history bends towards justice." And what the president often reminded us of is, it doesn't happen without our involvement. And I
Right.
think that's what
Right.
you're describing.
That's right.
And so it demands all of our involvement to actually fulfill on the hopeful future that you all outlined. So this was brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. So a round of applause for our panel.